this evening. We have a stellar panel today. I'm probably the most junior of them all and probably the most least qualified. But I'll try my best to ask the right questions, hopefully to get the right answers. Let me start with the facts. Between 1992 and 2014, according to the Committee for the Protection of Journalists, 1,123 journalists have been killed while on duty. Last year, between January and June, the Indian government asked Facebook to delete close to 5,000 posts because they were anti-national. We are only next to Turkey in the whole world where the government has asked so many posts to be deleted on social media. Between July 2014 and December 2014, the number of content pieces restricted by Facebook after requests by the government of India had risen to 5,832. The latest Freedom House report, which was released a couple of days ago on the state of the freedom of the press around the world, puts India as only partly free, whereas Canada, US, the UK, Australia, etc., and the Scandinavian countries, of course, are completely free. Is our freedom, our transparency, our space to express dissent only a myth? Has it been restricted to only a small patch of journalistic integrity? I want to ask the panelists the first question. Shekhar, what do you think? Is the space for dissent restricted and has it become a myth?
I think space for dissent has actually expanded. The question is, what do you describe as dissent? If dissent means disagreement with government policy, disagreement with state policy, disagreement with, say, the intellectual establishment's policy, disagreement with the corporate, I don't think there's any limitation to space. In fact, space has expanded because of social media. And also because now there is a safety, now you get safety of the mob, which means even if one is put down, someone will get in. And I'll give you an example. There was a case in Delhi to do with a hospital where in a case of kidney transplant, liver transplant, the donor died, right? Not the guy receiving the transplant, the donor died. And the reporter was under pressure from the hospital owner, who's somebody we all know very well. And he said, I'll speak with your editor and it'll be sorted out. And he spoke with me and I said, listen, you can speak with me. We have friends, I can stop the story, right? I'm empowered to stop the story. But I have a young 26-year-old reporter who's a wonderfully talented reporter. She can walk straight out of my newsroom with her story, go to another paper, right? Or TV channel. Maybe you know those owners also. You can stop that. If nobody gives her a job or runs her story, she'll go home, write a blog about it. The story will be out and you and I will both look cheap. So I think the space for dissent and disagreement and for good journalism has really expanded. Problem arises when dissent is defined as meri jo marzi mein wo kahun, right? I can send compliments to anybody's mother, sister, poison your dog, whatever. I think that's where, in fact, I find as a journalist that our space for sensible and professional and nuanced dissent is being taken over by a mob. And mob which is ideological on all sides, which is also just bitter. This whole trolling business has now come up. And also which works in silos. So that's a problem. Beyond that, I don't think any government in India is so strong. Fortunately, since I've become a journalist in 1977, no government's been so strong, including Rajiv Gandhi with 413 seats. He tried to pass the anti-defamation law. He failed. Modi may succeed with land acquisition, but Rajiv failed. So I think if any journalist says that she has a great story can't come out because of limitations to dissent, I think somebody's being lazy.
But there are instances, Vasu, you're reporting, for instance, in the Love Jihad story, for instance. You faced a lot of opposition from ideological forces. You faced a lot of opposition from government in some cases. How do you deal with this? I mean, you went on ground, you reported on that, and there were some facts that are out, and there were some facts that were suppressed by a lot of government authorities. And there were some myths that were being created by statements by various politicians. How do you tackle those when you're a reporter on the field? and not an editor in the newsroom.
Right. I mean, again, just to take up from what Shekhar said about defining dissent, as a journalist, and I still consider myself as primarily as a reporter, I don't think it's my job to be a dissenter. Our job as journalists is essentially to, coin the old cliche, speak truth to power, even if power in most cases knows the truth and isn't very interested in it. That's essentially what you have to do, and you have to do it as honestly and as objectively and in as nuanced a way as you can. And it's really a question about whether you're in an environment, whether you can do that or not. Now, I'm not just saying this because Pranoy is here, but NDTV continues to remain, at least for me, a space where I can go out and pretty much report on almost anything that I want to without ever having to run into any kind of editorial interference saying you can't touch this or that story. But where I'd slightly disagree with Shekhar is I don't know if that's necessarily the case with the media as a whole. I mean, I think that the media establishment has always tended to tilt towards the ruling establishment of the day. And when you see a change of regime, you always see that pick up a certain degree of intensity. So you almost have a kind of competitive sycophancy now where you see a number of media proprietors and owners and editors who are kind of falling over themselves to position themselves as loyalists of the new regime. Some of them may already have been ideologically aligned to the new regime and are now coming out of the closet. The others are trying to curry favor. And for journalists who work in those organizations, to have the sort of freedom to go out and report on the regime of the day, to be able to tell those stories to the extent that they should be told, I don't know how that easy is. Let me give you a counter example of what I'm talking about. And I'm not just talking here about necessarily reporting stories, but also not reporting stories, or also reporting them to the degree. Now, you have a situation where the president of the ruling party, firstly, becomes the president of the ruling party while he still has a pending case, charges against him of murder, 3 individual murder cases against him. Was there any noise about this? Was there any questioning of this? No, there wasn't. Then that gentleman is discharged in December of this year. The manner in which that happened, again, we won't get into it because this, at the end of the day, involves the judiciary. But leave that aside. The CBI has 3 months to challenge that in an appeal. The 3 months pass. The CBI does not challenge it, surprisingly enough. And
Or not surprisingly enough.
Not surprisingly enough. And there's absolute silence. You didn't see that story anywhere. You didn't hear that anywhere. Now just imagine if the reverse was true. Suppose Sonia Gandhi was appointed president of the Congress with 3 murder charges against her, and then 3 months later, after she's discharged, the CBI doesn't challenge, that appeal. And the noise that would have around that, not just the noise of the fact that there was no challenge, but the fact that there was complete media silence. So I don't think it's as simple as saying that we have, I mean, I certainly agree with Shekhar that there are many more platforms now for journalists to get the news out. But I think that there are also situations, or there is a situation where you do have a constraint on what you can say and you can't say. And again, I don't want to say this is unique to this establishment. I mean, when we were doing stories with the previous setup, you have this, you have similar dynamics at play. But I think we are very much in that time. Maybe that time is now changing, right? There's a certain degree where the honeymoon begins to wear off and people begin to find their voice. But it's not, I wouldn't say it's entirely a perfect scenario.
But how,
What I meant was, there is no imposed limitation. These are limitations of greed or lack of spine. That you can't complain to anybody if you don't have the courage to say, or somebody in an organization or a journalist or an editor. I mean, I also, in fact, I've written about this. It's an outrage that editors line up, take selfies with the prime minister, whoever the prime minister, right? I mean, is that what we keep for our grandchildren? Right, had my picture taken with the prime minister, right? So there is a problem, but that problem is not imposed by any state or any party. That is a problem that has come up within our profession, and we have to look within.
in a sense that it's journalists who are responsible for their own safety or their own voice, so to speak, in this case?
No, in this case, in many cases, journalists are looking at something. right? It may be something as innocent as access, or to be able to say, oh, Prime Minister acknowledges me, uh, or the Prime Minister comes to my event. So these are all things that have to be dealt with at an editorial level.
Krishna, your magazine has been consistently been anti-establishment, especially during this regime, and you face a lot of opposition, with your reporting and with the kind of stories that you've put out, especially some covers that have come for some kind of, well, uh, not dissent, but surely some kind of criticism. So, how do you deal with that, and what do you tell your reporters when they're out on the field and they get your story, and it's maybe anti-establishment, it may be anti-individual, and the individual may be in power, he may be extremely powerful, he or she, and you get that story. How do you deal with that versus the noise that is taking place outside on social media, on ideological platforms?
I completely, totally disagree with Shekhar on this whole issue of dissent, because I think we are confusing dissent with freedom. I think there are two very distinct things, and I think we can't get confused about it. There's no question that this space has expanded. There's no question that the media has exploded since 1994, 95. But I cannot tell you that the space for us to say and do the kind of things we should be doing has grown. In fact, I will posit before you a very straightforward theory at this point of time. If we were to have emergency declared at this point of time, if we were to have censorship declared at this point of time, I would argue with you that it might not even be on page 1 of our top newspaper. I'm saying that things have gone far beyond the established paradigms of dissent and censorship and freedom. What has really happened is that at one point of time, the state was the predominant enforcer of consent. And what has really happened since 94, 95, especially post-reforms, is that it's no longer just about the state, it's about institutions, it's about newspapers, it's about ownerships, it's about editors. In fact, I would go so far as to say that some editors themselves are great obstacles in getting dissent across. So I would argue to you that what has happened in the last few years is really quite dangerous. And quite frankly, if we are not alarmed about what's happening, we'll be quite shocked. I think the brand leaders, whether they are newspaper or television in this country, have set such low benchmarks. It's shocking. We seem to have, post-liberalization, got into the whole spectrum of serving up news to suit audiences. It seems to be as if we only appeal to a certain SEC A, SEC B kind of audience, and that seems to be, deciding the way we cover the great issues of our times. Let's not kid ourselves with all these growth numbers. Of course, India is growing. Of course, India is a positive country. Of course, India is on the upward slide and so on. But the sad fact is that we are a country with great poverty, illiteracy, despair, disease. And if you see how our predominant newspapers and TV stations cover this, it's a shame. So I would argue to you that the space has expanded, but frankly, the space to get messages across has really shrunk. And I would not even kid myself with this whole online thing at this point of time, because it's very easy for us to get distracted. The key guys, the big elephants in the room, need to be doing what they ought to be doing. And frankly, they are caught with their pants down, all of them. So since you asked me about what we, and I say this, thank you. I say this because, I think we are, as Vasu very rightly said, what's really happened since 95 in particular, and post this government coming in, is that business and politics is being wrapped around the tricolor. I don't know if you saw an extraordinary editorial written by Mint newspaper the day after this government went after Priya Pillai. You could say that it's the newspaper's freedom to air that point of view, but to couch everything around the tricolor, to couch everything around India, to couch everything around Indianness, I think is quite dangerous a path to be on. And you're seeing examples from Pakistan and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, and God forbid if it were to happen in India, that this were to explode at some point of time. So we need to be very careful. The greatest editor-in-chief of this country, and I mean no disrespect at all, the greatest editor-in-chief of this country said, I have no desire whatsoever to conceal from this court that to preach disaffection towards the existing system of government has become almost a passion with me. Sedition in law is a deliberate crime, but it appears to me to be the highest duty of a citizen. Guess who said that? Mahatma Gandhi, 1922.
Wow.
You know, so I think we in our profession have completely, frankly, lost sight of many of these things. You know, we seem to be thinking that we need to be towing a government's line, a corporate's line, a businessman's line, a sportsman's line. You know, we just seem to have lost sight of it. And frankly, when I say that, I mean the big guys. What are the big guys doing in this country? You know, the number of stories you hear in Delhi and the number of those stories which make it to print or on TV is disproportionate. And that's
which is what Vasu was talking about.
There
It's
are
what
all
is
these
not
factors
reported.
at play.
Yes.
There are all these factors at play. So it's no longer just about the state. And of course, the state comes across and hits you with a big, ramrod. But the fact is that it's gone beyond the state. It's become institutional. It's become ownership. It's become editors. And it's also become non-state actors like extremists and fundamentalists and so on and so forth, who seem to be dictating terms happily to us. And we seem to be very happy taking that. Gurbir made a very, very fine point, and I think he spoke very briefly about it. The fact is, ownership in this country has gotten so dodgy, whether of newspapers or websites or TV stations, that you don't know what agenda is being pushed. So what kind of freedom are we talking about, and what kind of dissent are we talking about? So I think when as a magazine we approach these stories, I would argue to you that as a magazine we've been anti-establishment, not just with BJP, but also the Congress. You know, we've also done the strongest anti-Congress stories. Let's not forget who broke the Radia tapes. You know, so we've done that. We've taken on everybody. But the point is that as a newspaper, as a TV station, as a magazine, we need to hit everybody across the board. I know this audience might be shocked to know that I sat at a meeting last year with the editor of one of India's top newspapers. And let me not say which one that is. And the discussion was, what is the angle, what is the point of view that the paper now needs to take with a new government in power? Can you imagine that discussion at the New York Times? Can you imagine the New York Times thinking, oh, Hillary Clinton might come to power, how do we change our views? It seems to be that we seem to be changing our views as we feel fit, as the market wants us to feel fit. And the market is playing a really bad, terrible role in this whole process.
Thank you. Minister Prabhu, we've had three journalists talking very nice things about your government, not necessarily about you. But you've also, you've also come into government only recently, in the sense that you joined the BJP only recently. You're now a establishment person. How do you see the difference, how media has approached stories when you were not part of the establishment, and now that you're part of the establishment, what kind of change do you see? Krishna and Vasu made a very important point about stories that are not printed rather than stories that are printed. According to me also, stories that are not printed are perhaps more important than stories that are printed, because we don't know what goes under the radar rather than which is on the radar. How do you see as a representative of the government, how do you see that?
Largely the role of the media has to be anti-establishment, normally. Otherwise, if it is a democracy, obviously the media has to give a contrary view, because otherwise it will be one of the state-owned newspapers. That's how we have got Pravda in the old USSR times, or something like, so we don't want that to happen, and that's why we actually have such a proliferation of media business. In fact, when you talked about corporate and others, the media is also business. So, and if you really look at it, the fastest growing segment of a business, the service industry, is media and entertainment. I don't know whether they should go hand in hand, but that's how it is described. So, in fact, this is one of
Some would say media is entertainment.
So this is one of the fastest growing segment of a business, particularly in the services sector. So media has to be, obviously, there is a proliferation. So people have an aptitude for it. If you go by the market wants it, then that's why it's growing, and that's why the corporatization of media is happening. So it's inevitable and welcome. There's nothing wrong in that. So anti-establishment part of the media is not something we should really be concerned about it. They have to be anti-establishment. They give a contrary view, so we understand it. But what I feel is anti-establishment. Establishment is, what is establishment? Is it only related to government in office? The political class, is it establishment? Or if you, for example, if one party loses the power and the other party comes to power, is the party losing power becomes anti-establishment? Or a party which you think, that now we are trying to take a particular position against a government of party because the ruling party is establishment, the other party is not establishment. Try to expand this argument to what is establishment. If you look at it, I don't think India, we can say 5% people pay income tax. Is this establishment? You can say, now it has little bit increased because of, thanks to the new initiative. But anyway, this is what is establishment then? Then are we all establishment or we are anti-establishment? So because we may be reporting against establishment, do we become part of anti-establishment? Or we are also part of the establishment? If you really look at it...
Minister, I'm sorry, but I think we're confusing some, semantics out here. I think Krishna Prasad and, Srineevasan and Shekhar made a very relevant point in the sense that when there is a change in regime, especially Krishna, when he said, when there is a change in regime, why should a newspaper or a TV channel or a website or a Twitter personality, for instance, why should that person change his or her views? Or why should the newspaper change?
That, of course, is a exclusive domain of the editorial people, so I would not go into that. But what I'm just saying is, look at it like this. Essentially, media becoming not pro-government is always something which I don't think anybody should try to induce media to become pro-government. But when you talk about anti-establishment, I was just trying to talk about what you really mean by anti-establishment. When you make a story about a poor person and how is it deprived with. It is not just that a government is actually being responsible alone as an entity to be the perpetrator of that particular crime. It is an entire system that has gone up. So now, largely speaking, are we not catering to a particular ideology then? In that automatically it happens like that because, suddenly now we want to write against a particular party or a particular because they come to power. So I think, in my opinion, I don't find any problem with media writing against the government. That is a job they must write. And in fact, always welcome, because sometimes it is a good idea to get a contrary view. Only my issue is that we should not necessarily be working only because now, for example, BJP has come to power. So all of us need not necessarily take anti-BJP stand just because BJP is in power. I'm just saying. So, what we really need to do is that could we, looking at anti-establishment part, well taken, has to be, but not necessarily a particular party because it has come to power. Because other parties are also as part of establishment as we are now. Secondly, I think the dissent issue. I think by just simplifying the definition of dissent, you can say what is not a consent is a dissent. So maybe we can just simplify it, oversimplify it maybe. But so I'm saying not necessarily we have to have consent, but not necessarily we have to go to the other extreme of saying that because I'm not consenting with you, I am going to take an extreme view of completely take a contrary view to this. Because there are certain issues in which probably a media could also, by giving a constructive idea, suggestion, criticizing the government policy, could help shaping a better policy. And this is always possible. So the beneficiary of all this process will be the larger public good. And that is what I am sure all of the media people are trying to report about, to achieve a larger public good. So if that is the case, I think we should try to find out some common ground on which different viewpoints, but not necessarily bordering dissent, and definitely not a consent, could not be the new paradigm that we can work on, at least for the next 20, 25 years. One point I am very sure about, and he mentioned about 77, I think that was a landmark year. I don't think there is any possibility of any party even attempting. Of course, Rajiv Gandhi attempted it in 1980, 1981.
87.
87.
89, 89.
I'm sorry. 84 he came to power. 87. So that was a very short attempt. Otherwise, I don't think there is any possibility of any political party, any government in office even trying to do something about the media. That we are matured enough now, I don't think, and that's a welcome thing that this is going to happen. I'm just looking at, could we not also develop some sort of, on some issues, at least some of the areas. One of the controversial issue I'll mention, and not many people will agree with me probably, say population control. Is this not an issue? Should it not be something we should be talking about? We don't talk about it at all. Neither we as political parties, nor the media. And this is something which, in my opinion, is the biggest challenge we are going to face. Looking at water, looking at energy requirement, and looking at land requirement, and many others. So I'm just saying, should
sir,
we not looking at...
Sir, sorry to interrupt you, but how do we talk about population control when one of your own partymen says each Hindu must have 5 children?
No, listen, I'm very serious about it. What I mean is, see, listen, by simplifying it like this, if you can solve population problem, I'm with you fully. I'm very happy. You have come up with such a brilliant solution. I will be very happy. If we can accept that solution and can solve the population problem, I'll be very happy. So, you know,
No,
that is what exactly what I meant.
The population is not about the India's population. The population is about community-based populations. I mean, and these are lawmakers. These are not
Listen, again, that is very
these are not
unfortunate.
fringe elements.
That is again a very unfortunate part, that the moment we talk about it, we want to give it a color. See, this is something which is an issue really of, can, say, look at globally also. Everybody realizes, you know, this climate change debate and everywhere else we talk about 7.5 billion people, which are going to be 10 billion people. Is it sustainable? Looking at India's context, 2.2% of land, 4% of water, is it something which is possible? But when we talk about it, it might get a political color of you are trying to talk about it because you have that hidden agenda about that community. I think why should we try to bring that in? Rather than that, why not focus on a very real basis? Is it not an issue? So that's what I meant really was that maybe an issue like this could be an area of agreement of working together. That's what I meant.
No, I just want to say that I think trying to come back to the debate that we are currently having about whether or not there is a greater degree of freedom to be able to say what you want to as the press. And to take up from what Shekhar said, that Shekhar, you seem to suggest that this is largely a form of self-censorship or of different people competing to be who will be the town crier, as Mihir Sharma said in his column. But it's not as simple as that. I mean, the media doesn't...
Mihir Simon Sharma.
Mihir Simon Sharma, correct. Doesn't operate in that sort of a vacuum. I don't think it ever has. I mean, if you have a prime minister who says, or who uses terms like news traders to describe the media, if you have cabinet ministers who use words like prostitutes, if you are operating in that environment, if there's a whole definition which the government now seems to be placing about what constitutes national and what is anti-national, which doesn't just apply to Greenpeace, but also applies to the media. I mean, each establishment draws its boundaries, and then it's for the media to decide where it wants to place itself in relation to that. But it's not as if this is entirely something that is brought on just by your own volition. This is also a function of the atmosphere you're operating in.
First of all, to your specific question of the New York Times, New York Times will hold such editorial meetings, but only when the Republicans come to power, right? Because as long as Hillary Clinton comes to power, look, America to that extent is very transparent. New York Times, Washington Post endorse presidential candidates. How many times have they endorsed a Republican candidate? So that is very clear. In fact, the moment a Republican comes to power, they will have such a meeting and they will say, now how do we deal with this government? I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing, irrespective of which side I am on. So they do not pass that test. Second, your question of establishment. Yes, media should be anti-establishment. But can any one of us, can any editor, can any owner, can any media organization, the Press Council of India, the Editors Guild of India, anything, information and broadcasting minister, God, any God you pray to, can anybody define for all journalists that this is the establishment and you have to go against it? What is the establishment? Definition of establishment keeps changing all the time. Definition of establishment varies from issue to issue. Definition of establishment varies from state to state, city to city. When Congress was in power in this country, in this state under Prithviraj Chauhan, I thought Shiv Sena was the establishment in this city, not the Congress government. Similarly, when the Anna movement was, in fact, I was asked this question many times, why is the Express arguing with the Anna movement? And why is the Express arguing with Arvind Kejriwal and Aam Aadmi Party? You are the anti-establishment paper. I said, because you are the establishment now. Because they had power that the government of the day did not have. And what happened? It doesn't matter. We got a lot of gali, we got a lot of abuse. 500 meters from my office, Arvind Kejriwal picked up a copy of the Express and effectively instigated the crowds at Ramlila Maidan to come and storm my office. And I told him, I said, I have a newsroom full of young people. 80% of them are women. Something happens to them, you will be responsible. You are instigating mob violence. And then he came to meet me, and that will answer your second question, because everybody is guilty. किसी के हाथ दूध से धुले हुए नहीं है. आप सबने वही खेल खेला है. He came to see me, and he said, look, I understand that you have disagreements with us, but the line that your paper has taken on our movement, have you checked with your marketing department how that's playing in the market? So I said, Arvind, you think I'm making a Bollywood film? And do you think I'm running an entertainment channel or running a TV serial? I'm sorry. News is what news is, and we can have our views. We can disagree with you. The point is, everybody has learned to play this game, including Arvind Kejriwal, who everybody in the media who hated the BJP at that point supported, and hated the Congress party because he was seen as the new hope. No questions were asked about him. Nobody read the text of the Jan Lokpal bill, which is impossible to pass. Under this constitution, it's impossible to pass. Nobody read his 75-word pamphlet called Swaraj, which I call Arvind Chitrakatha, because it says, restore India to the glory of Vaishali in 332 BC, right? And Magad will fight Vaishali, etc., etc. Nobody read any of that because he was the darling that day. And because he was the darling, the power he used, one besides threatening people, was access. So just think, who are the two editors, older editors, who have weekly, in one case more than a weekly TV show, with whom Arvind Kejriwal has never appeared in an interview? And they were the only two who've questioned him, because that's his way of getting even with you, that I will not give you access. So I said, fine, it's your right. Give me access, don't give me access. Anybody is right. So these are things that you have to deal with. The definition of establishment keeps changing. Definition of establishment, I will tell you, today I agree with you that, that media let the whole Amit Shah thing pass, and media should have raised questions, right? But at the same time, when the previous government spent 10 years, right, they assigned an officer to that case with the sole purpose of getting them somehow convicted or disqualified from fighting elections. The month that officer was to retire in CBI, is a nice guy, but the month he was to retire, he's a Muslim, the month he was to retire, he was appointed Vice Chancellor of Jamia Millia University. Which media in the country questioned this? When we questioned this, and we said, look, you appointed a general for Aligarh Muslim University, you appointed a retired cop for Jamia Millia, why don't you appoint a retired general or a retired cop for JNU? Right? That is when he did not get his job, because the very fact that you did this destroyed the credibility of the entire investigation process which had taken place. So what you can see is one establishment was incompetent, they were not able to fix these guys. The other establishment proves, I say, incompetent in a qualified sense. The other establishment was super smart, they got their guy out.
But Shekhar, this is somehow precluding the fact that, at least as far as I'm concerned, I'm assigning values to the BJP versus the Congress, which I'm not. For me, there is no essential difference. We're right now in a BJP government, and therefore we're talking about them, because that's the experience of the past 8 months. But this is not.
We are in agreement over that.
Huh?
We are in agreement on that.
Yeah. So this is. I don't see any difference as far as both are concerned.
But you know,
and see, as far as abuse is concerned, frankly, nobody's been abused as much as me, at least on this panel, right? I'm with this.
Are you so sure?
No, I'm 100% sure, including by you, right? Selectively quoting from this and that on your blog. Sometimes I call you and say, boss, you theek nahi hai, iska factually theek kar do. So it's fine. Abuse never killed anybody. You know, I had a manager in my office who used to deal with our union. So our union, whenever they had demands, they come Friday evening outside my window. Fridays is when I used to write my column at Indian Express. And they shout, Murdabad, mar jao. And this guy says, आप चिंता नहीं करना, जितनी बार लोग मुर्दाबाद कहते हैं, आपकी उम्र एक दिन बढ़ जाती है. तो उनको बोलो ज़्यादा बोलेंगे. So we have to have thick skins. We should not complain somebody is abusing us. So what?
yeah, you wanted to say
Yeah,
something.
Sachin, I just want to add to what Mr. Prabhu very rightly said. You know, we can argue on what is establishment or what is not establishment or what is anti-establishment. What you cannot argue on are the basic fundamental issues before this country. I don't think you can argue with population. I don't think you can argue with poverty, illiteracy.
I will argue with population of Redink.
All of those things, frankly, are beyond debate. And on those issues, we have really with you on that story. But the point of this conversation, I suppose, is dissent. And I think what Mr. Prabhu should also articulate when he goes back to Delhi is that this government sits on a fundamental anti-media platform. For a party which built its reputation for a leader like Mr. Modi, who made his name using the media, the kind of anti-establishment tone that this government has set is a very poor precedent and could really boomerang on this government at some point of time. And I say this with great respect because you really do not want a cabinet minister telling you we are prostitutes. You do not want the prime minister of this country to call you a press trader.
Were you okay with an army chief calling you a prostitute?
No, same thing.
No, but none of you protested when he called me
all of
prostitute
us
when he was army chief.
You got to read a little more.
None of you
Shekhar.
did.
You got to read a little more.
All of you snickered
You have
on the
to read a
side.
little more on these stories, but people have protested those issues. But the point is that you cannot have people like the army chief, a minister, a prime minister, have this kind of constant anti-media refrain. And I say this because it's a very dangerous precedent. And I don't say this only of the BJP. I mean, we must be a mock democracy, a sham democracy, where a Rahul Gandhi does not talk to the media. A Sonia Gandhi barely spoke to the media. A Narendra Modi does not want to talk to the media. They do not have a proper media advisor whom you can go to in New Delhi. There is just a crazily insane anti-media attitude which is seeping in. And if you look around this country, this vast country, and this country is not Bombay or Delhi or both. This is a very vast country. You look at a Jayalalitha who can just go happily through without ever having a press conference. Nitish Kumar, Mayawati, who are these people talking to? The point is this kind of an attitude against the media is a very serious issue. And I think we as editors, we as journalists, we as press clubs must really stand up and take note and protest. And I hope as a minister, you take note. I'm very happy to
say that
see you here.
access is a birthright.
Access is not just our birthright, but frankly, we must make our, this is not about people who are on first name terms with Mukesh and Kapil and this and that getting through to ministers and others. It's about lay reporters making their way through, not just in Delhi, but in Chennai, in Bhubaneswar, in other parts of the country. What you have are mini dictatorships springing up in the name of a democracy. And frankly, we look like a conglomeration of mini dictatorships. And that's very serious if you look at dissent and consent. Noam Chomsky wrote about manufacturing consent. I would argue to you, sir, Mr. Minister, that manufacturing dissent is a fundamental duty of the media. We must raise questions, we must ask questions, we must protest, we must say the things you don't want to hear. If you want to hear what you want to hear, that's called advertising. And what we do is journalism.
But I think he agrees with that. I don't think he's disagreeing with that point.
I never doubted I'm right. In fact, I was saying that this is now beyond, so this has to be there and dissent is of course. I just want to clarify one point because you mentioned about a prime minister. See, this is something which is very unfortunate that out of context, one particular part of a sentence is magnified in a way.
He's repeated it many times.
Yeah, he's repeated that.
But what about
He's
what?
left nothing to chance.
No. I'm
In
just
fact,
saying.
I'm not worried, but he's left nothing to chance.
Mr. Minister, he spoke about the safety of the mob. I clearly remember this tweet that was put out by
Someday
General
some
VK
mob
Singh.
will attack somebody,
Yes.
kill somebody or beat up somebody, and then you will have a real problem on your hands. Because people say, everybody is saying these guys are thugs, they are prostitutes, they are thieves.
No, my wife.
Traitor is the minimum abuse you get.
My wife who's not a
Moron is the
journalist.
minimum compliment you get.
My wife, who's not a journalist, who has got no stakes in the system, said, "Oh, you must be now entitled to a red lamp over your car." I said, "Why?" Because you'll now all be called prostitutes. So be a red light area all over
I'm
your cars.
exactly in the opposite position like yours. My wife is a journalist, so I'm what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, please, I can definitely assure you one thing, and that is something which Prime Minister has a great regard for media. So this is something which is come out of that. So I think this is not something which I think we can take it like that.
Mr. Minister, are you hearing the crowd?
This is, I can say with my personal experience. So this is something. Only thing is that all of you feel. See, when we are sitting even in our closed door, we say some elements are something which always is the case. So that probably is true for politicians, true for doctors, true for everybody.
So can you give me one reason, just one reason, why you don't want to have a media advisor or a media PRO through whom we can go through? Somebody who takes our phone calls and responds.
So you mean to say...
I'm dissociating myself from this. I'm quite happy if we don't have a media advisor.
No. But tell me something. You know, I'm really surprised. You just having a media advisor means you are a pro-media person?
No, that's not the point.
No,
The point is, who
let
do you
me-
go to in this
See, the
government?
Prime Minister is communicating all the time with, and what is the job of a media advisor is to communicate.
No, sir. Twitter is not communication. Twitter is a one-way device.
No. But media advisor, how does the media advisor help you in that? No. How will media advisor help you with that?
Many editors who will tell you they are media advisors, you go to them and they may be more, more credible than media advisors.
No, but this is something that even Vasu brought out. I mean, there have been editors who've become town criers, so to speak, in Mihir Sharma's words. And it is not really the managements who are, forcing their hand or twisting their arms and telling them, do this or do that. They might. They perhaps are doing it. I don't know. But there have been editors who've had a complete volte-face, when the new government came into power, or for that matter, when the Congress came into power. So clearly, it means that there are journalists who are willing to, go with the wind.
No, that's for again, I don't want to comment on what the journalists should be doing or what journalists are doing. But what I'm just saying is, this is a completely wrong perception about our government. We are not anti-media at all. And in fact, this is something which I want to really say this because I know exactly, because I've been talking to all my colleagues, including
It's just
my leader,
media to
Prime
be
Minister.
friendly and
So I think
patriotic.
this is a
Constructive. The word is
completely-
constructive.
completely
And nationalist.
a wrong perception, and I hope it is not perpetrated with deliberate repeating of that. So therefore, I think personally,
Are you
the
on,
very
you are on Twitter, sir?
No.
No,
The
I just
very
want to
fact-
ask you, are you
No, Srinivas.
I know you have a Twitter handle, but do you spend
very-
time on Twitter?
No. But the very fact that this government, in fact, is coming out with all sorts of communication all the time. I don't think any minister would have told you that we don't want to meet the media. In fact, I can see more ministers of this government on the media than
No,
the
sir,
previous government.
they don't tell you they don't want to meet you, but they tell you of the kind of stories that they'd like you to do and hint,
But which minute-
and hint at the consequences if you don't.
No,
Let me put it like that.
No, Vasu, listen. I'm older than you. Which minister did not? Which minister said, do a story against me? Every minister tells you that, do this story, I've done such a wonderful job, but this guy, my cabinet colleague, is a useless fellow, right? And he will also tell you that is the skill that you guys have. But having said that, only one factual correction, Suresh. I think the worries about population. It's a... Mr. Narayan Murthy says, in God we trust, the rest of you bring data. So look at data. Look at 2011 census. India's population growth rate now is 1.4 per thousand, right? It is really low. And the way things are going, not because you are running an aggressive family planning program and catching people from buses and figuring out what faith they have, and either giving them a shot of, to get them to produce more children or to what they used to say in Haryana during the emergency, connection kaat diye, right? Uski zarurat nahi hai. The fact is, as India is becoming less poor, as people are developing a greater stake in the system, as more women are going to school, birth rates are coming down. Today, India's birth rates are a full percentage point, 100 basis points, as bankers say, lower than those of Pakistan. And by 2030, the way things are, even without making any controversy of it, India may get zero population growth.
We are nowhere near replacement level.
By 2030, you will get there.
I'll just tell you. Today's projection of our population growth will be somewhere between 1.6 billion to 1.8 billion by 2050.
That's because your guys are counting Muslims.
I'm sorry, as moderator, I have to stop, I have to curtail this discussion on population because we really
I understand. And just one short point is, I understand. That's why we'll have I'm sure we'll do a cover story on that, so we'll talk about it.
Again, the minister's telling you what to do.
I'm saying, what is the problem? Population is, when you have such natural disaster, India, if you exclude India's mountains, deserts, and all the water bodies, India is one of the highest population density country. We don't increase our water availability just because the population growth is going to be 1.6.
We don't increase our FSI.
No. If water doesn't increase, so you can increase the land, but not water. So what I'm saying is, There are natural resource constraints. So that was the only short point. We'll discuss some other time.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Minister. Thank you, Krishna. Thank you, Vasu. Thank you, Shekhar, for being here. Thank you, Manika, for calling us. And sorry for running out of time. Thank you very much.
I'm so sorry to have to stand here like this policewoman and ask you all to wrap up. But unfortunately, much as we would have liked to continue this discussion on the limits of population growth, I want to thank Sachin Kalbag, Shekhar Gupta, Krishna Prasad, and Srineevasan Jain for that fabulous discussion. But more than anybody else, I want to thank the Minister, Suresh Prabhu, who has braved an auditorium full of journalists. He is the only politician here. So please, a round of applause.